I didn't know Mr. Barletta had come back a few minutes ago, but Mr. Barletta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Farrell, could you please explain to me the connection that exists between crash risk and violations like having an inoperative license plate light or the sleeper berth not having a blanket?
Let's walk through the basics. The 7 elements of analysis in the CSA system are not all highly correlated to crash risk. The ones that are the strongest are unsafe driving, which would not incorporate the 2 items that you identified, the crash indicator, and hours of service compliance, today known as the fatigue basic, but it will soon be the hours of service compliance basic. The others are all indicators of compliance. And compliance is a core component of ensuring not just that you're following the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Rules, but that you're demonstrating the behaviors to be a safe carrier. That's why those rules are in place and established through federal mandate and the rulemaking process. What we have found and what our analysis shows is that on those basics that are compliance specific, say in some of the vehicle maintenance areas, there is generally 3 out of 4 carriers that are high in one of the compliance basics, specifically the driver fitness. 3 out of 4 of those carriers are going to have another basic where they're exceeding a threshold and an indicator that we need to go and look at them. But each of those violations you mentioned probably have lower weights than others because they're an indicator of compliance or lack of compliance, but not necessarily that safety risk that you identified. The system together is where what we utilize for making decisions.
Do you think, for example, not wearing a seatbelt gets a weight of 7, but following too close or improper lane change is a 5? How do you justify that?
Not wearing a seatbelt is a high indicator of a problem if you're in a crash. Not just for that driver. Seatbelts save lives. But the fact that a seatbelt also keeps you in place if you start losing control of that vehicle and you're not belted.
How about improper lane change, though? And if you're driving in the mountains of Pennsylvania, I could tell you, if I had to choose between somebody not wearing a seatbelt, a truck driver, or an improper lane change, 10 out of 10 of us are going to say an improper lane change is a much more severe violation than not wearing a seatbelt or following too close. Mm-hmm. I'm all for truck safety. My family was in the trucking business and construction business. But, I think if we look at this practically, I don't know if there's anybody here would say that an improper lane change is less severe than not wearing a seatbelt.
Well, if I could just, I think your point is very well taken, and the whole concept of listening to the concerns that have come forward is very relevant to us. We had the Motor Carrier Safety Advisory Committee last year look at the weightings for this very reason, because again, the concerns came up early in the process. We want to address them. So it is part of the analysis that we've undertaken. The advisory committee recommended some changes to the weighting system, and we just announced in August, when we rolled out some of the changes, that the next round of changes we're analyzing include the weights and the relationship of weights to.
I just think it makes more sense to really focus on driver error and driver abuse. Mr. Mugno, what are the biggest problems FedEx has experienced with CSA, and how do you recommend fixing the problem?
As I indicated in my statement, it's the lack of relationship between the carrier's CSA score and the crash risk. It's the underlying data that we have a concern with and its inconsistency, and then it's the system's methodology. I almost got through today without pronouncing that word correctly every time.
Sorry about that.
What happens with those then, it creates these symptoms that result from those. And it's an inefficient use of resources, not just for the agencies, state or federal, but quite frankly, for in-house safety programs of ATA carriers as well. We too have to prioritize. We too have resources that we have to try to maximize as much as possible. And obviously, we'd like to put them where the priorities are. And as we stated today, we think the priority ought to be on future crash risks and reducing those as best we can. It's the use of the flawed scores by either the agencies, even ourselves, and focusing on that to change that because that's what everybody's focused on, and or these third parties that were talked about as well. And then finally, one of the other symptoms that really bothers us and was talked about here today is the data queue system, the appeal process, and the amount of time and resources and efforts that go on there, the lack of consistency that's going on with those. I do want to also, though, say that, we want to end on a high note and a good note here on this. We are very much in favor and positive on the CSA principle in and of itself. Again, its carriers are very supportive of that. We like the additional focus that's been put on this. We like the additional dialogue that we're having with the law enforcement agencies, the agency itself, others, drivers, carriers, and all that. That's working. That's what attracted ATA and its members. For me personally, when I went to my very first CSA 2000 stakeholder meeting about 6+ years ago, I guess it was now, and doing that. So, I mean, all those things remain positive. The problem, obviously, now is that the new channel of dialogue is more focused, unfortunately, on these issues that we're talking about today, as opposed to, in our opinion, taking care of the future crash risks that we really want to get to.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.